Good evening. Hope that everyone is well this evening. Hope that you have had a good week so far. You know, as we start to get into Saul, this first king, Israel is at this time united and will stay that way through Solomon. They're going to get to be as strong and as big as they're ever going to be. They're going to be together. The only time in history that they're really going to be all together, all under one land, all under one king. They're going to get protection from those around them. They're going to enlarge their borders. They're going to really see the glory of their kingdom. And God's going to allow that to happen. They want this again. You know, when you talk to Jews, talk to even Christians who look for a millennial or look for a millennial reign, they desire this again. They desire for Israel to be restored. If you don't believe that, then just get online and Google in there Christians for Israel. You're going to see it all over the place. You know, and they think we all ought to be supporting that effort. You know, we all ought to be behind that effort because they see that as the end game, as Israel being restored, Jesus coming back, reigning from Jerusalem. That's the end game to them. That's how they see it all ending. But of course, I don't see it that way, and I hope most of y'all don't either. But this was what they want. They want this back, this land inheritance, this protection of God, this enlarged border, redeeming, bringing Israel all back into one thing. That's what they look for. They look for this, and they still desire this to happen to it. You know, in this thing with Samuel, he is addressing them. He's old. We really go through a lot. You know, 1 Samuel 12, it seems like, well, we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered it really fast. I mean, Samuel's went from being a little boy in the temple. Now he's grown and he's old, and his kids are rejected, and Saul's king, and all these things have happened. And so Samuel, he is kind of giving his little farewell address, even though he's really not quite done yet. He's still giving his little farewell address. He says, "Here's the king walking before you, but I am old and gray, and my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my youth, even to this day. Here I am, bear witness against me before the Lord and his anointed. Whose ox have I taken, or whose donkey have I taken, or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed, or from whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? I will restore it to you." They said, "You have not defrauded us, or oppressed us, or taking anything from any man's hand." And he said to them, "The Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is a witness to this day that you have found nothing in my hand." And they said, "He is witness." And Samuel said to the people, "It is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers up from the land of Egypt. Now take your stand, that I may plead with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous acts of the Lord, which he did for you and your fathers, when Jacob went into Egypt, and your fathers cried out to the Lord. And the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt, and settled them in this place. And they forgot the Lord their gods, and sold them into the hand of Sisera, captain of the army of Hazor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab. And they fought against them, and they cried out to the Lord, "We have sinned against you. We have forsaken the Lord, have served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. But now deliver us from the hand of our enemies, and we will serve you." And the Lord sent Jerubbaal and Bedan and Jephthah and Samuel, and delivered you from the hands of your enemies all around, so that you lived in security. You know, Samuel, he's old, and he wants his confirmation. And I guess maybe at the end of our life, maybe we would want that. I mean, I would think, right, that we've been good, right? That we've lived a good life, and that we've honored God, and that we've, you know, not defrauded anybody, that we've lived the life that God would have us to live. And Samuel, it's important to Samuel that not only he knows that, but it's important to Samuel that they know that. You know, we'll all stand before God one day, right? The Bible says. We'll all stand before the judgment seat of God. And we're going to have to answer, right? We're going to have to answer. Just like Samuel, we're going to have to we're going to stand before him and give him the chance to say something, right? Samuel sees failure in his life, I think. You know, they got a king, right? And God didn't want him to have a king. And they rejected Samuel's sons. You know, that's his posterity. That's his future, right? And they've rejected his sons. You know, Samuel says, there's sadness in Samuel, isn't there, at the end of his life? I think there is. I think there's sadness in him. A man that served God, that tried to walk right, do right, and yet in the end of his life, it really didn't go like Samuel figured it would go, did it? As so many of us, the end of our life, right? I mean, sometimes I think we have a picture in our head, you know, of how it's all going to end, right? You know, how we're going to go out. But the truth is that, you know, we don't have much control over that, do we? And Samuel didn't either. And Samuel felt failure, I think failure in his life. And so that confirmation, I think, wasn't just about Samuel saying, it was more than Samuel just saying, what have I done against you? But it was more the idea of Samuel kind of admitting in a way that he hadn't really lived up to the expectations that Samuel had set for himself. And I think that's tough at the end of Samuel's life. Samuel was a good man. Samuel served God from the time he was right. His mother left him in the temple. We saw that. Served God his whole life. And he wanted it to go that way. He wanted his kids to go that way. But no, they wanted a king. And Samuel, even though God told Samuel, he says, Samuel, they haven't rejected you. They rejected me from being king over them. But Samuel still felt the sting, didn't he? He still felt the sting. And Samuel, I think, at this point, at the end of his life, Samuel's got a ways to go. It's not like Samuel's going to kick the bucket here in the next 5 minutes. Samuel's got a little ways to go. But I think Samuel's in this reflection mode with them, and he kind of is telling them, he says, you got a king, right? And you've chosen, you've asked for it, and the Lord has set a king. And you will fear the Lord and serve him and listen to his voice and not rebel against the command of the Lord. Then both you and also the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God. Isn't that profound right there? It's profound. So he's saying, listen, it's not only you now that have to serve the Lord, right? It's your king. You see? Now you've got a representative. Now you've got somebody in charge. If that king doesn't toe the line, if that king doesn't respect you, if that king doesn't serve me, then you're going to pay. We're going to see that, especially in 2 Samuel. They're going to pay a huge price for the failure of kings. A lot of them are going to die because their king failed to serve God. When you're in a position of leadership in the church, you stand to a higher standard, I think. You have responsibility. That's why James says not many of you should desire to be teachers, because you stand more accountable, I believe, as a teacher, as an elder, as a minister. I think you stand a little closer to the fire, you know, best way I know to say it. Makes you wonder, well, why would you do it? Well, you're kind of commanded to do it. It ain't really like it's an opt-out. If you have the ability, you're kind of commanded to do it. So you just need to do the best you can, to the best of your ability. Because I think in this case, the king is responsible here. God often holds people responsible that aren't necessarily the person who sins. I know it's the person who sins who pays the price. Don't get me wrong. I understand that. But isn't it true? You know, we're fixing to get into headship in 1 Corinthians. Isn't it true that God puts a headship in place in his kingdom? And that those on the top of that, those in the position of that headship, don't they carry a larger responsibility in God's kingdom? I think absolutely they do, without any doubt in my mind. Don't you think that? You know, Eve took the first bite, right? Didn't she? Eve took the first bite. But in the New Testament, who did God condemn? Eve or Adam? Adam, right? Adam had a responsibility to his family, to his wife. He had a responsibility to stand up and to be the man that God expected him to be. And he failed in that responsibility. So we all have headship. Everybody in here. People say, well, Rex, you're just saying. In Corinthians, Paul says Jesus is the head of the man and man's the head of the woman. But isn't it true also, then the women, they have headship over their children, right? There's a chain of command in God's kingdom. There's a chain of command. And you and I, when we follow that chain, we live a better life. We just do, than when we step out of it. But we're also held accountable. And that's the case here. He says, you will not listen to the voice of the Lord. If you do not, but rebel, then the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. You know, they still need God, is what Samuel's saying. Even though you've got a king, even though now you've got a king and you think that's going to solve your problems, you still got to have God. If you don't have God, then the Lord's still going to turn against you. It's still not going to go your way. Things still aren't going to happen the way you want it to happen to. And so this is this warning. He says, take your stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do. Is it not the wheat harvest today? I will call to the Lord that he may send thunder and rain. Then you will know and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, by asking for yourselves a king. And so Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants, the Lord your God, so we may not die. For we have added all our sins, this evil, by asking for ourselves a king. And Samuel said to the people, do not fear, you have committed all this evil, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord. What's the significance of the wheat harvest? Anybody ever harvested wheat? What happens when it thunders and rains? Don't get no wheat, right? He says there's a price. There's a price for being wicked. There's a price for what you've done. And it was evil. It was evil when you asked for a king. So why did God do it? Why did God allow it? Why didn't God just say, no, I'm not going to give you a king? Why did God allow them? Why did God allow them a king? If it was evil and it was wrong. Why didn't he just say, that's wrong, I'm not going to give you a king? You ever thought about that? Teach them a lesson. It's all going to play out in the end, right? It's all going to play out in the end. Because if there hadn't been a kingship, if there hadn't been a kingly lineage, then Jesus couldn't have been born according to the prophecy to come from a king, right? There had to be a kingly lineage. God has got this figured out. Don't think he doesn't. God's got the long game. God's got the end game figured out. He's got it figured out. But it still doesn't mean it wasn't wicked for them to ask. But also it tells you something about God, doesn't it? It tells you that he can even use evil for good, right? He can even use evil for good in the end. God has that ability. God sees the long game. You and I don't see it. We can't see it, but God sees it. And sometimes you and I have to have the faith to trust in that. And that's hard. It's hard to do sometimes. We see today. We see this minute, this instant, this moment. We see the evil. We see what happens. We see sorrow. We see heartache. We see grief. Why, Lord? Why do you do that? God sees the long game. You know, yeah. Right. Yeah, it was still provisional, wasn't it? Even in that, it was provisional. So Saul's king, they're paying a price. He's warning them, as God does. He warns them. He warns them. He warns them. Don't do what God says to do. Follow the Lord. It's going to be good for you. If you don't follow him, it's not going to be good for you. Here's the thunder. Here's the lightning. I'll pray, and it comes. And they're scared, right? They're scared because it's lightning, it's thunder. Samuel prayed, and it happened, and they're scared. Don't let us die. He says, you're not going to die, right? They're scared of God, scared of what they've done, scared of their sin. And so it says, the Lord will not abandon his people on account of his great name, because the Lord has been pleased to make you a people. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. But I will instruct you in the good and right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, and consider what great things he has done for you. But if you still do wickedly, both you and your king, will be swept away. So this is kind of a warning chapter. This is what will happen. This is what you need to do. This is who you need to be. But it's just not going to work, is it? Because continually we turn back. We always look at the Old Testament. I do. I always read it. I've read it my whole life, and I'm like, why? Why are these people so ignorant? Right? I mean, this happens over and over and over again, over and over and over again. Like, when are you going to learn? When are you going to learn? But we read this pretty fast, don't we? I mean, a few minutes a night, we're through it. We'll be through 1 Samuel, a couple more nights, we'll get through 1 Samuel. But this is years, right? This is decades of history. How long does it take us to forget, to do right? Right? Why do we forget? What happens to us? I've stubbed my toe on my nightstand a dozen times in my life, right? Why? Why do I do that? I know it's there. I know it hurts. I've done it. I've rolled around on the floor. I know that it's there, right? And I do it again. Why do I do it again? I don't do it the next day. I don't, because my toe's still sore, and I think, darn, I ain't going to do that again. I'm walking around, right? But you give me a couple, 3 months, lo and behold, I'm going to whack that dude, right? What? Right. Why do we do that? Why? Because we what? We forget. Yeah, we don't change, right? And it goes along for a while, and it's like, oh, well, that's, I forget. Do you forget? I forget. We forget. And they did too. Things go along good for 10, 15 years. No big problems. God's blessing them. Things are good. Harvest is great. Then all of a sudden, God says, well, enough's enough, right? I've had enough of you, and now you've got problems, and now you're going to pay a price. They're like, oh, we'll straighten up. But then 10 or 15 years later, they're right back in the same deal. It's like Buck says, why do we repeat our mistakes? Right? Why do we repeat our mistakes? We don't learn, and we don't change. Like Buck said, that's the biggest problem with me. That's why I repeat mistakes, because I don't change what caused me to make that mistake in the first place. Why don't I move that nightstand over 6 inches, Why don't I move my bed over 6 inches? Why don't I wrap the bottom of it in bubble wrap? Anything, right? Learn, right? Learn something, Rex, learn. But I don't, right? Because we come back into that same thing. And when we do that, we're going to fail. It's just human nature. I just don't know how else to say it. It's human nature. If you keep yourself in the wrong place, along the wrong temptations, you're probably going to fall back into the same pattern. And we just have to change something in our life to make that better, to make that different. And they didn't do that, and they fell back into the same traps. And right. And the more we don't do, the more, like Gary said it, if people stop coming to church, it gets a lot easier after 3 or 4 Sundays. A lot easier. Really does. It's pretty hard for a Sunday or two, but after 3 or 4 or 5, it gets a lot easier. We got to stay on the right habits. We've got to put the right things in our life, and we have to keep those things in our life. That's how we live a good life. If we don't do that, we're going to fall the wrong direction. It's just how we are. It's human nature. They're no different than we are. We're no better than they were. And I always have to remind myself that when I read the Old Testament. I always have to remind myself, I'm not a better person. I'm no better part of humanity, even though it's thousands of years later. I guess evolution's not a thing, because I don't think we've evolved past this, right, in 3,000 years. We're still the same people they were, aren't we? I mean, we're still the same type of humanity, and so we still face the same struggles that they faced, and we still deal with it sometimes very poorly. So there's lessons here for us. Saul was 30 years old, and he reigned 42 years. So that's an old man for that period of that time. That's an old man. Saul chose for himself 3,000 men. 2,000 were Saul. And so Saul's building an army. That's what Samuel said Saul was going to do. He said, he's going to take your sons, he's going to take your daughters, he's going to take your crops. You know, if you have 3,000 men, how you feed them, right? I mean, that's a lot of groceries. You take it from the people, right? Just like Samuel said he was going to do. You take it from the people. So he's taken this tax, taken this toll, taking stuff from them, and but he's defeating people. God's on his hand. The Philistines assembled with 3,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people like the sand which is on the seashore, and they came up and camped. When the men of Israel saw they were in a strait, for the people were hard pressed, the people hid themselves in caves and thickets and cliffs and cellars and pits, and some of them and some of the Hebrews crossed the Jordan into the land of Gad and Gilead. But as for Saul, he was still in Gilead. All the people followed him trembling. He waited 7 days according to the... Now listen, this is him doing the right thing. In a minute he's going to do the wrong thing. So, who told him to wait? Samuel, right? Samuel says what? He waited 7 days according to the appointed time, but Samuel did not come. People were scouting from him. See, he started right, didn't he? This is going to cost him his kingship. This is going to cost him his life in the end. This was a bad mistake. He didn't wait. Who's still king, really? God, not Saul. You see? But Saul thought, I'm king. Just like David's going to think, I'm king. I can get away with it. He forgets who's really in charge. God's always in charge. It don't matter how important we think we are, how great we think we are. God's always in charge. Saul forgets it. The funny thing is, Saul did what I would do. Every time I read this passage, I think, this is Rex. Because I'm impatient. I mean, I'm an impatient person. I mean, if you know me, you know that's true. I mean, I'm trying to be better. I really am. But truth is, I have a lot of patience. You know, I don't like waiting. I just don't. Never have. I don't deal with it well. So he's waiting 7 days. That's a long time, right? Army's coming. 7 days. Samuel says to wait. People are leaving. Saul said, bring me the burnt offering, the peace offering, and he offered the burnt offering. He can't do that. See, there's a way. There's a method. There's the right way, and you can't do that. He can't do that. He's not a priest. Kings can't offer sacrifices. Priests offer sacrifices. That's how it's done. It wasn't his place. He should have waited for Samuel, but he didn't. The problem is not that. The problem with this is not really that he didn't wait. The problem is that he took authority from God. He decided he was king and he could do what he wanted to do regardless. He didn't offer the offering. He didn't offer the offering because of God. He offered the offering for Saul. You see that in this story? We miss that. Why did he offer? Why did he do it? Because the people were doing what? People were leaving. He's got to fight a war, right? He's got to fight a battle. Everybody's leaving, right? He wasn't worried about God. He's worried about Saul. Nothing to do with God. He did it for Saul. I can't have these people leaving. I'm going to offer this offering. We're going to go fight. You see? He took authority away from God. He didn't have no right to do that. He had no right to do that. You can't take away God's authority. You can never do that. When you do that, you're putting yourself in the place of God. That should have been a priest. That was Samuel's job, not Saul's job. Saul did this for Saul. You can't do that. His heart wasn't where it's supposed to be. He should have waited. If he would have had faith, the faith he should have had, he knew God was going to give him this victory. Even with a small number of men, God was still going to give him the victory. But Saul couldn't see that. If I'd have been Saul, I maybe couldn't have seen it either. I maybe would have made the same mistake. I don't know. I maybe would have thought the same thing. I can't have these people leaving. I got to do something, right? I got to do something. I got to do something to keep them here. I'm going to offer this offering. It's no big deal. Sure it is. Because as soon as he did that, Samuel shows up. And now Saul's got some splaining to do, don't he? You know, why'd you do it? What are you thinking? Why'd you do it? Samuel waited on purpose, didn't he? Didn't he? Samuel was probably just over the hill looking. What's Saul going to do? Wonder if he'll wait. Saul failed. He failed the test. He failed Samuel. Samuel knows it. What have you done? Saul makes an excuse. Isn't that what we always do? Don't we always make an excuse? It's always not our fault. Is that right? It's always somebody else's fault. I mean, if these people would have stayed still, if your people would have stayed still, God, I wouldn't have had to do this. Why didn't you just keep them here, right? Samuel, why couldn't you have been a little bit quicker? Y'all forced me. I didn't have a choice. You forced my hand. I had to do something, right? I had to do something. There was scattering. And you didn't come. You didn't come in the appointed days, right? And the Philistines were assembling, and I had to, because they were gonna beat me, and I have not asked favor of the Lord, so I forced myself. Do you see the terminology? I forced myself to do it. I had to force myself, right, to do this. They knew it wasn't right, but it's your fault, Samuel, right? If you had been here, this would have never happened. It's your fault, God. If you'd have kept them people here, this never would have happened. But since you didn't, you forced me into it. I didn't have a choice, right? You think? Think he had a choice? Sure he did. Sin, people. That's how it works. Over and over and over. Forced me into it. Right? You're the only person who can make those decisions. And Samuel said, you've been foolish, and you have not kept the command. And whenever you see that Lord your God in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, that's serious business right there. That's serious terminology. That's like being called by your first and last name. Right? It's serious stuff. Because Lord, that's the tetragrammaton. That's the name of God, right? Right? So it's the Lord, name of God, which we don't know how to pronounce, Jehovah or Yahweh or Yewah, whatever you want to say. Right? It's like a double. And so it's big. And he says, which he commanded you. For he would have established your kingdom forever. But now it shall not endure. Isn't it funny? Samuel already knew, didn't he? He already knew. God already told him, because God already knew. God knew. You can't hide from God. You can't hide what you did. Samuel already knew, and if you read and look at the tense, the Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people. See that? He knew. God knew. It's done deal. It's already done. Why don't you think he gave him a second chance here? Doesn't God give second chances? Third chances? Because he's king. Right? You're the guy in charge. You're the guy. You messed up. No second chances. No do-overs. You've lost your kingdom. Now, of course, it's not going to happen in a minute, right? It's not going to happen today, but it's going to happen. It's interesting how this transpires to get us to David. Because not only is Saul going to lose the kingdom, but the tribe of Benjamin is not going to be the kingly tribe. It's a double thing here. It says Samuel arose. Saul numbered the people who were present, about 600. And Saul said to his son Jonathan and the people who were present, numbering the people is always a problem with God. Even though God allows it sometimes, and occasionally, one time I think for sure God told him to do it. But God doesn't ever really want you to number. Numbers aren't important to God. Numbers aren't important to a God who can whip the Midianites with 300 men, right? Numbers are irrelevant. Numbers don't matter. God matters. Whenever we number, whenever we count, whenever we do that, we're not giving it to God. We're trying to handle it ourselves. And that's something God doesn't want us to do. God never wants us to handle it on our own, to handle it ourselves. What Gary said in his Devo tonight, you know, how powerful is that? Is that why are we anxious? What makes us anxious? What really makes us anxious? The most anxious. Huh? Things we can't control. Am I right? Isn't that what makes me anxious? It does. I'm fine with what I can control. I really am. I mean, even if it goes south, I'm still okay. I'm all right with it. I'm okay with me because I know I can control me, right? But when I walk into something with somebody I can't control, I get a little anxious sometimes because I don't know how they're going to act, what they're going to do, right? Sickness, illness, disease, that makes me anxious because I know I can't control those things. Lack of control. God says, listen to me. I've got it. And sometimes we just have to believe that. We have to listen to that. I've got it. Because we can't do it. I can't do it. And that kills me. It kills me. It does. You know what keeps me awake at night? The things I can't control. Because I don't know where it's going. We really can't control anything, but we feel like we can control certain aspects of our life a little better, right, than we do others. Sure, absolutely. And that's what I know. Yeah, sure. That's what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, right? Worry about today. You know, worry about today. And you know, I don't think that means we shouldn't plan for tomorrow or think about tomorrow. I think Jesus thought about tomorrow, don't you? I mean, you can't read John's gospel, can you, without thinking that Jesus was thinking about the cross. I mean, he was thinking about tomorrow. He was worried about the people he was leaving behind. He was concerned, wasn't he? Sure he was. But he knew that he had to do it. He knew that because he was worried about tomorrow, he had to take care of today. Am I right? You know, why did he tell his apostles? Why did he give those to me? We looked at high priestly prayer Sunday night. You know, John 14. John 13 to the end of John, right? I mean, what was he doing? He was trying to take care of tomorrow today. He was saying, I'm going to give you what you need. I'm giving you what you need. You need to listen to me. I'm worried about you, but I'm praying for you. He was taking care of tomorrow today. So I'm not saying we shouldn't think about tomorrow, but I'm just saying the anxiety of tomorrow can't erase our ability to do something today, even if that's just pray for it or contemplate on it, or like Gary says, meditate on it. Or, you know, the bad always overpowers the good in our lives, always. It's just how we're built. You can have the best day on earth, and somebody can, you know, cut you off on the road and it ruins your whole day, or say something to you at the store or whatever. It can ruin your whole day, right? And the truth is that you have to say, I'm not going to do that anymore. Because everything that happens like that, it steals from your today. And you know, I'm learning something. It's took me a long time to learn it. But I'm never going to get to live this day again. This day's done. Never going to get to live this day again. What I've done, I've done. What I failed to do, I failed to do. But I'm never going to live this day again. And you know, when I look back on my days, I just have to ask myself, what kind of person, what kind of days do I want? Do I want days that's filled with anxiety and fear and hate and anger? Or do I want days that's filled with love and peace and goodness and mercy? I'll take the love and the peace and the goodness and the mercy any day of my life. Am I right? You know, and I think that's something that we're all old enough in here. We know that. We know that. And it's just, we steal our tomorrows. We steal our todays. And I just don't want to be that person. I just don't. And I'm not saying I don't get aggravated. I'm not saying I don't get mad. I'm not saying I don't have bad things happen, because I do. I'm just saying I don't want that to dominate my day. At the end of my day, my memory of that day, I don't want it to be bad. I don't want it to be a bad memory. I want to put that away. I want it to be a good memory. Because why should I dwell on what's bad? Isn't that what Gary was saying? Why should you dwell? What should you dwell on? What's good and pure and holy and right? Right? Isn't that what we should dwell on? Not on what's bad. Getting off track a little bit. But we have decisions to make. Saul had a decision to make. He made a bad decision. Really bad decision. God's still going to help him. God's still going to deliver Saul for a long time. He's still going to protect Israel. But God's turned away from him now. And God's got somebody else. And Saul's going to pay a price for that. And when you really look at the whole overreaching idea of it, you get the idea, I guess I should, that they're dependent here, aren't they? They're dependent upon nations around them. It says that no blacksmiths can be found in all the land of Israel. For the Philistines says, otherwise the Hebrews will make sword or spear. So they made it where they couldn't even do their own weapons. And all Israel went down to the Philistines, each to sharpen his plowshare and his mattock and his axe and his hoe. And the charge was 2/3 of a shekel for the plowshares, the mattocks, and the axes, and to fix the hoes. And came about on the day of battle that neither sword nor spear was found in the hands of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan. But they were found with Saul and his son Jonathan, and the garrison of the Philistines went out. So, they couldn't even make their own weapons. The Philistines had to do it, because the Philistines had had them under control for so long, and they weren't going to give them that technology, were they? That seems like mild technology compared to technology today, but it's pretty critical technology, right? And they weren't going to allow them to have that, because they knew if they had that, they would be a foe that could go out and fight against Israel, or fight against the Philistines and win. So the best thing they could do was to make it where they couldn't have any weapons. They couldn't have any weapons to take. So they're kind of in a pickle, right? But here's where Jonathan comes in. I love Jonathan. Jonathan is a man in the Bible that if you had to have a friend, you'd want a Jonathan. He's just that kind of guy. He was a guy who, his friendship was more important than his kingship. That's a big thing. That's a big thing. His friendship was more important than the kingship. His friendship was more important than his family. His friendship would become this force that's going to catapult David to be king. But Jonathan, it's really kind of interesting here, because when you kind of follow this story, which we will, and you kind of see how Jonathan interacts with David, you kind of think Jonathan is kind of weak, right? Like, he should just take control, And you kind of are like, why doesn't he just man up and be who his dad wants him to be, Why doesn't he do it? And as you kind of get further into it, you almost think, well, Jonathan, maybe he wasn't that much of a man. Maybe he wasn't that much of a warrior. Maybe he wasn't that king material. But the writer of Samuel, he paints the picture that Jonathan's mighty. Jonathan's this mighty force to be reckoned with. There's nothing weak. There's nothing mild. There's nothing inadequate about Jonathan. Jonathan's 100%. And that adds to the story. It adds to Jonathan's sacrifice, and to Jonathan's love for his friend David. We're not there yet, but it says, and we'll get there, but it says that Jonathan and David's souls were knit, that they were that close of friend, that there was no division amongst them, that they were that kind of friends. And that's rare in the world, and it's rare here. And it's going to cost Jonathan, in the end, will cost Jonathan his life. So it's a really powerful story. And it takes a long time kind of in Samuel to kind of set the stage. But the stage is kind of getting set here. The stage is kind of getting put together. And Jonathan's entering into this. All of a sudden in 14, Jonathan comes onto the stage. But Jonathan doesn't come on as somebody weak and mild and inadequate. Jonathan comes on, and this writer of Samuel portrays Jonathan as somebody mighty and adequate and 100% somebody who could be king of Israel. But yet, Jonathan's not going to be king of Israel. And it's just in that story, that friendship between Jonathan and David, it transcends this whole dialogue in the end. Influences David way up into 2 Samuel. That friendship endured with David even long after Jonathan was gone, and it makes this tremendous story of it's just a tremendous narrative. But I think you got to get them players in your mind, and I think here, which we're not going to get there tonight, but I think when you start into Jonathan, what you need to see originally with Jonathan is how adequate of an individual he was. And then it makes sense, what he has to give up for David. And it kind of gives you the power of that friendship. Shannon's probably putting something up, I can tell. But anyway, thanks for y'all's time this evening.